हैदर, मेरा इंतकाम लेना मेरे भाई से। उसकी उन दोनों आंखों में गोलियां दागना जिन आंखों से उसने तुम्हारी मां पर फरेब डाले थे।
चले ही चले धीरे से चले रहे सारी जिंदगी,
वरना तू भी डिसअपीयर हो जाएगा अपने बाप की तरह।
मैं खुद के अपने भाई गायब है कई महीनों से।
डिसअपीयर्ड लोगों की बीवियां आधी बेवा कहलाती हैं यहाँ, हाफ विडोज।
एक फूंक से मियां सब उड़ गया धुआं, वो जो सांस की एक फांस थी वो निकल गई जो खराश थी।
I have loved you more than my life.
आज जब झूठ बोले ना नहीं अच्छी लगती। दिल की दर्द सुनूं तो है, दिमाग की तुम्हें नहीं। जान लो कि जान दो, मैं रहूं कि मैं नहीं। बदला
हेलो माइक टेस्टिंग 1 2 3 हेलो, आवाज आ रही है आप लोगों को? हेलो 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 हेलो।
Sure. So I'll be addressing the question of, is the political status of Kashmir the real? Is the political status of Kashmir to be or not to be with India the real Hamlet and Haider? And I personally think that that was not the intention of director Vishal Bharadwaj when he decided to set his rendition of Hamlet in 1990's Kashmir. I believe that his main intention was to have an authentic allegorical film that represents Hamlet somewhere in India. And before he decided to film in Kashmir, he actually tried to create a spy espionage thriller. And he realized that it didn't have enough of a tragedy element in it. And so he decided that Kashmir would be the perfect setting because he remembered a book called Curfew Night, a narrative of the human rights injustices committed in Kashmir, which is written by Basharat Peer, who actually helped co-write the movie with him. And the Kashmiri plight is one of the largest tragedies in modern-day India, and so he decided that this would provide the best backdrop for his film. Furthermore, within Hamlet, the question of to be or not to be is a very deep existential question, and I don't think that it can be extended to the status of Kashmir as a state. It's a question for the human heart, and in Hamlet, it was Hamlet's question that he asked himself in the beginning of the play. To be or not to be was him asking, is it worth staying alive and carrying the burden of the human heart, or is the bliss of death worth taking? And for Haider, his question, I believe, his to be or not to be is to get revenge for my father or to let it go. And the real message of Haider is that revenge only begets further revenge, that to keep killing does nothing to free you, but only hurts the loved ones whom you care about. And so at the end of the film, when Haider does not kill Karam, I believe that it's because he realizes that revenge is not the answer, and that his quest for revenge has only gotten all of his loved ones killed, everyone who he cares about. But by that time, it's too late. And as for the controversy of the film portraying the Indian Army, Bharadwaj has responded with the words that I'm also an Indian and I'm also a patriot. I also love my nation, and so I won't do anything which is anti-national, but what is anti-human, I will definitely comment on it. And so Bharadwaj seeks to stimulate a conversation about the injustices and human rights abusements which have been committed against both sides in Kashmir, against both the militants and their families, as well as against the Hindu pandits. And so only by bringing this to light can he achieve his true ambition of asking the question, is killing the answer, or is putting down your guns and making peace, no matter the surges of your heart, the answer to true freedom?
Thank you. So I think that's an interesting question. Since you're sitting next to you.
Sure thing. Okay. So my question was about whether the film was more sympathetic to the terrorist organizations than to the state. And a lot of critics who had strong nationalistic views believed that the film was sympathetic to terrorist groups because they thought that it discounted, I guess, the work of the Indian Army and kind of demonized the Indian Army. But for the most part, many of the reviews I read analyzed the film kind of praised it for its cinematic achievements. The first point that I'd like to make is that this is a Bollywood film, so it's based on a narrative. And although I think some parts of the film were based off of reports from reporters who acted during the conflict, the film itself is not a true story. It's an adaptation of Hamlet. So it's not meant to be objective like a documentary or a report. And obviously when you're stuck within the bounds of a Bollywood film, you can't really expect complete objectivity from a director. Secondly, just because the director in the film chose to focus, I guess, on the narrative that coincided with the militant groups, it didn't mean that he was justifying or being sympathetic towards the actions of the militant groups themselves. I perceive the film as being largely based on personal relationships, and it kind of used the conflict, I guess, as a backdrop, even though it was a very important piece of the setting. And in films, you can see that when a director is trying to sympathize with one side, he'll try and dehumanize, basically, the other side by manipulating the audience's connections with characters. So, for example, you can use cinematic techniques like close-ups and reaction shots to kind of humanize characters, while you can use long shots and shots that show people, the villainized group as a unit or a single force, in order to take away their humanization and kind of make them a unit and very mechanized unit. And that's not really seen here. So the director kind of allows us to form these human connections with characters on both sides. So for example, in the army, the superintendent, you see him form these affectionate bonds with his daughter, and that kind of ties us to that character. And on the militant side, you see Haider, he's the main character, and you get to connect with him during these struggles. So you have those personal connections on both sides. But on top of that, you also see violence on both sides, and you see death on both sides. I think there were quite a few scenes where the militant groups started the violence as well. It wasn't only one-sided, and you saw death occurring on both sides. So the director clearly wasn't trying to force the audience to sympathize with one side over the other. I think it was an overall struggle that he was trying to portray. And so my final point is that this film is an adaptation of Hamlet, and one of the most important aspects to note and remember about Hamlet is that it emphasizes the blurred lines between right and wrong and good and evil, and kind of the circular nature of justice and revenge and the unsustainability of vengeance. And so one of the main critiques of this film was that it demonized the Indian government and military, while it praised the actions of the militant groups. But after watching the film, I don't really think you can say that any one person in that film was a hero, and I don't think you can say any one person in that film was a villain either. Most of the characters in the film were very multifaceted, in that they contained both heroic and villainous qualities, much like in Hamlet. So, for example, Haider was out there to seek vengeance for his father, but in the process he killed many people. The two Solomon brothers he killed who were innocent, and they were trying to run away from him, basically. And then on the other side, you have his uncle, the informant, who basically turned in his brother, was trying to kill his own nephew. But there were also moments in the film where you were able to see his caring and his love towards his sister-in-law. He stopped the house being bombed because he didn't want his wife to see her son being killed. And you saw close-ups throughout the film where you saw maybe shame and fear and sadness and guilt for what he had done. So while the critics might say that they're trying to draw this black and white distinction between heroes and villains in this film, I think it's quite the contrary. I think the director is showing you that there is no hero and there is no villain in these high conflict situations, especially where there's a gross violation of human rights on both sides.
Thank you, Bethany. And Callum, finally.
That leads nicely into mine. So, yeah, as we know, if you haven't gone on now, it's an Indian adaptation of Hamlet, set in Kashmir. So the easiest way to sort of draw my question is discussing the adaptation achievements of the film and how it relates to the source material of Hamlet. So the easiest way to do that is to draw a comparison with by examining the mirroring roles that you've got between Hamlet and Haider. So Shahid Kapoor is Hamlet, Shahid Kapoor is Ophelia, Tabu plays Gertrude, and K.K. Menon is the uncle Claudius. The film's essentially not a direct stage-to-screen adaptation. I've said that the adaptation is more a spiritual one. So it's and Haider successfully brings out the emotional spirit of Hamlet while keeping the focus firmly on Kashmir. So a vast portion of the story you can probably draw pretty direct adaptation links. Ophelia is a young journalist, Polonius a sinister policeman, and Laertes works for a multinational. And Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the two Solomon brothers, are local men who are paid informants for police intelligence. And the famous play within a play feature of Hamlet is successfully sort of brought out in the Ismail wedding sequence song. So, as Bharadwaj has stated himself, Shakespeare's stories of conflict are relevant today and applicable pretty much anywhere. So I think that's what he's tried to bring out in setting it in Kashmir. So from that point of view, the spirit's very much alive. I've said that Haider's, it's perhaps a more visceral experience than watching Hamlet itself. Things like, instead of leaving Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to be killed off stage, Haider brutally murders them against the frosty backdrop of Kashmir. And I've said that the character of Rudar doubles as Homer in Hamlet. His father's ghost comes back to say, "Avenge me," and I've said that Rudar is almost that ghost, and if I'm actually watching back, he is referred to as a ghost. He has no past, no background, so that works quite well. Which is quite an astute way of grounding it in reality, while still conveying the message of the plot. And the good thing about the cameo of the actor who plays him sort of serves that purpose well. Many of the famous soliloquies have had to be omitted. But some of the most famous scenes are still there. Haider asks to be or not to be as he puts a handgun at his own head, and as a Muslim decides not to kill his uncle while he's kneeling in prayer rather than before an altar. So direct liftings from the original text are retained and translated. So the section where Hamlet meets Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the two Solomon brothers, and speaks about Denmark being prison is just converted to Kashmir as a prison. It doesn't exactly follow the original. The parts of Fornabra are not there, and other minor characters are left to the wayside. But the world of King Claudius and Polonius is portrayed as the counter-insurgency in government-run insurgent militias in Haider, and thematically dominates the action. So as a result, some of the other themes of Hamlet are left aside to focus on that core story. I did write down that the Oedipal complex that Hamlet has with his mother is very much there. That's focused on quite a lot, and on the second viewing of the film, it's even more obvious. So that can be interpreted as both a physical and psychological level. But it's kept quite subtle, but watching it again, it's easy to see. Equally, sort of the lack of soliloquies means that Hamlet or Haider is arguably a simpler man than the source material. In a sort of un-Hamlet-like way, he does know what he wants, to avenge his father, and then cannily goes after that. So I sort of finished off with saying, do the liberties in adaptation confuse the original source? and when not taken as a direct adaptation, instead as a spiritual homage to Hamlet, not at all. I said you can't just transpose a play at all, and to do it justice, which I think Haider has done, and to do justice to the context that it's been put in of Kashmir, it succeeds better perhaps as a tale of Kashmir unrest and official brutality, but it is successful as a spiritual adaptation.
Thank you, Calvin. I think that's
UN Council Resolution number 47 of 1948, Article 2 of the Geneva Convention and Article 370 of the Indian Constitution बस एक सवाल उठाता है सिर्फ एक हैदर हम हैं कि हम नहीं हम हैं तो कहाँ हैं और नहीं हैं तो कहाँ गए हम हैं तो किस लिए और कहाँ गए तो कब शराब हम थे भी कि हम थे ही नहीं जुट पाओगे हमारे साथ.
So, if anyone has any questions, anything they would like to ask any of the students here?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. So, I mean, it's easy, I think it's natural to say that it's an adaptation of Hamlet. But one thing that this movie has, which Hamlet doesn't have, is the Kashmir backdrop. And I sort of felt that Kashmir was itself a character here. There were so many things that were happening which sort of blended into the Kashmir narrative, which chronicles couldn't have happened. I was wondering what you thought about it. I mean, whether you think that it comes out really well, that it plays a strong role by itself.
I'd say by all means. I mean, yeah, I've said it. It's certainly a spiritual adaptation. So the role of Kashmir is almost makes it a complete excellent subplot, which the original source doesn't have. So in that sense, I said you can't just transpose the play into another setting. And what I like about the fact that Haider has not done that, and the writers haven't done that, they've stuck on what they want to do, and then they've quite cleverly weaved in the sections of Hamlet as well.
I think what's often overlooked about Hamlet is that it is a very political play, but we tend to sort of put it to one side and to concentrate on the characters. So I thought Kashmir was very, very suitable because in Hamlet, originally Denmark's been at war with Norway, Norway's invading it, and you know, I think it was a very good choice of where to put Hamlet on the
I don't really know Hamlet very well, but and just thinking what you said there about the characters and listening to them speak, something that struck me, that I find really amazing is, and I don't know if it's the style, because I don't really know, I haven't seen a lot of Bible films, but there's a constant, it's not linear, and there's these moments that are totally surreal, like them dancing in the snow, and a lot of these moments that can almost take you out of the story. They take you away from the characters. Even though they're showing you the characters, they make it more, it's like it keeps letting you take perspective, so that what you get at the end, you don't get totally engrossed in the character story, so that you don't end up with this bias of one character to another, because you keep getting taken out of the characters, and you keep getting taken out of the story till the end. At least I feel like I have this view of both sides equally, and it seems like a really interesting technique to kind of make you not identify with the characters, and yet you still feel for a lot of them because you can see all their sides.
I think it is a story. It's a kind of a documentary, but not a complete documentary.
But as a film, what struck me was it was very well made, very well acted, very well produced and directed. So it was one of the best films I've seen.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I'm not an expert on Hamlet myself, but as a film, it's the second time I'm watching it, and it's an absolutely wonderful film. That's my opinion.
Just a comment on what.
Yeah, Alistair.
I couldn't agree with you. I think the second part of the movie almost, I think the Kashmir was quite the focus of the first part, but as you go through it towards the end, I think it becomes more about the characters, about Hamlet, and I didn't see a lot of the Kashmir political thing coming into the second part as much. And to that extent, I would sort of agree that at the end of it, you don't really feel that it was, to be or not to be, it was a thing about Kashmir. So to that extent,
in Hamlet, the play opens with Hamlet asking himself to be or not to be, and that opening soliloquy starts off the play, whereas in Haider, you don't see him asking that question to himself until the middle of the film when he points the gun to his head. And so the beginning is really just like setting up the backdrop and getting the audience familiar with the political scene in Kashmir and what's happening in order to make it a convincing film so that the viewer is really pulled into it. And then by the time it shifts to the second half where the action is super fast-paced and everything is happening, one after another, by that time you already feel locked in, like you know what's going on, and you start getting a feel for the characters. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and just to comment to what you said, just the songs, I just felt like the romantic songs suddenly, it just felt out of place for me. It just felt like it didn't sit well in the movie. Suddenly,
I think there was one, that was probably the only song which felt out of place.
Because that's the little Bollywood influence.
Almost every Bollywood film has a music video in it. In Hamlet, there was a play where Hamlet reenacted out the events of his uncle betraying his father, and the audience consisted of his uncle and his mother, and he was studying his uncle's reaction to tell if he was actually guilty of committing that crime. So that the play was kind of transposed into a song there, and I think it worked well as a song instead of being a play. It might have been a little bit weird if it was a play.
Don't forget the dance as well.
The dance, yeah, it was a beautiful dance. It was really.
ये छुप छुप के नाच गाना पहले भी होता था या अभी शुरू हुआ है अबू जी के बाद
That song I was completely fine. It was that romantic number which popped in before that quite randomly. That was the
comment on that. And then there was a moment where I was like, wow, this is so real. And then what it reminded me of is like, even in these conflict situations, people still live lives.
Yeah.
And it's that, like, sometimes films are so that you come out and you're just like, all you see is the conflict. You don't see the lives. And in that, I thought that was like that's what I really liked about it. And you kept seeing the lives of the people. Like, people live in these situations. And it's kind of this reminder that life goes on in a sense, even if it doesn't go on.
That's true. And obviously the romantic number is just, I think it's there in many Bollywood films where it probably shouldn't be one, but
there was poetry in those songs.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah. And the one in the graveyard.
Oh yeah.
That's what you need. You need a bit of comedy, and especially there. And it was perfect.
I think that song really helped to ease into the final chapter of the movie, because it put that like a little lightheartedness and then suddenly switched to the final chapter.
Also quite Shakespearean.
Yeah.
We often have somebody who comes in and gives a grand surgery about something that seems a little different.
I think I have a question.
I want to revert back to one of the things that Piyush said in the introduction, that this is very much a Bollywood mainstream movie, and it was as such appreciated as a Bollywood mainstream movie. And in some ways, that is so. In some ways, that is so symbolic of India. Really, it's modern India. In some ways, the different one nationalism, but different nationalism narratives all blend together within democratic framework of exchange of opinions and even hard opinions, and the mainstream basically mingling with that in some ways, and sometimes we lose sight of that. But this is in some ways even a celebration of that.
Yeah.
If I could come back to what Bethany said, I mean, in fact, I find that the reverse is true. I don't think it's on the side of the terrorists, because if you dissect it, the only dialogue that gets repeated during the movie is this part about revenge begets revenge, and true freedom only comes when you achieve control over your sense for revenge. So it's almost like, I don't know, it's like, for me it's like the director wants to set a message, that war can't win anything or story can't win anything.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you did a really good job. I think someone else was saying was to make sure that you were invested in the characters, but not too invested that you became emotionally tied to them. So you were able to view it, I guess, from a distance and see both sides equally.
I mean, I think who plays Haider? I think incredible to portray sort of the sort of spiral that he goes through from this perfectly sane, almost quite meek character when we first meet him to this maddened by the end. I thought it was really incredible. Shaving the head, and when you first meet him, when he's talking to the audience, when I was reading that, that was all done in one take to an audience who weren't quite aware of what was going on. He just did this speech, and they were told to reply freedom at the right point. I thought that was really incredible. But equally, the mother was very much. You weren't quite sure whether to trust her, what she was thinking. So that was very layered performance, and I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think most people would agree that Shahid Kapoor's acting was phenomenal in the film. I think he's been praised by critics alike all over the country. And Taboo, who plays the mother, is, again, if people watch Bollywood films and differentiate them from Hollywood films, they would know that she's a very acclaimed actor as well. So I think the casting in this film, personally, I really loved it because I felt Vishal Bharadwaj chose the right people to portray the right characters, and like you said, they did it phenomenal.
Section 5, Rule 4.A. Any commissioned officer, G-Sharp, warrant officer, G-Sharp, non-commissioned officer, G-Sharp, or any other person of equivalent rank of the armed forces may in a disturbed area, if he is of the opinion that it's necessary to do so for the maintenance of public order, and after having given due warning as he may consider necessary, fire upon, or otherwise use force, even to the causing of death, against anyone acting in contravention with law or order. Law and order. ना law है और ना है order. जिसका law है उसका order. Made on order, law and order. इंडिया पाकिस्तान ने मिलकर खेला हमसे border. अब ना हमें छोड़े हिंदुस्तान, अब ना हमें छोड़े पाकिस्तान. अरे कोई तो हमसे भी पूछे कि हम क्या चाहते हैं. पार भी लेंगे आजादी, उस पार भी लेंगे, हम लेके रहेंगे आजादी.
Thank you all for coming around. First to Piyush and
गुलों में रंग भरे बादलों बहार चले गुलों में रंग भरे नैनों